trip overall to the 209?
Dude, it was great, and I got to say that what made it great was Nate. He was. I mean, obviously, I've known Nate for years. I've covered his fights. I've seen him at events that he's either fighting at or not fighting at. But he was just. When you go to someone's hometown, and the Diaz brothers are sort of known for being late. Not being the most reliable guys. When you text them you're going to be at a certain place, and
Right.
when are they going to show up? Are they going to show up? And Nate was awesome, man. I mean, he really spent the entire weekend with me. We hung out. On Saturday, just kind of casually, just catching up and not really filming anything. And then Sunday was when, we did some work with him, and it was great. He showed us around Stockton, and I had a great time.
When you have that type of interaction and I guess that type of access, isn't the off-the-record stuff more interesting and deeper than what you actually get people to say on the record? Because you still, especially in a combat sport, have to be guarded to some extent with what you say.
For sure, yeah, and that's always the case. And as a journalist, that's really frustrating because you hear something and you really want to share it with everybody, but you also got to respect what these guys want to keep private. And it's just kind of like balancing that line. Like there were a few times with Nate, this weekend where I was like, Nate, this is a great story. You got to tell me this on camera. And he's like, oh, I don't know if this is something that needs to get out. I'm like, dude, this is you've got the biggest fight of the year, really, in my opinion. A rematch against Conor McGregor at UFC 202 is going to be the biggest fight of the year. People want to get to know you. A lot of your fans know you, but some casual fans are kind of meeting you for the first time because of after the Conor fight. Like, this is the time to tell those stories, and
Yeah.
it's just always the conversations you have with those guys. Because some of them, and like anybody else, I think we like to keep some things private, and you got to respect that as a journalist.
So this rematch, I would agree with you. It's the biggest fight of the year. I actually think it might do 1.7 million pay-per-view buys, which would set the all-time record. I think it's going to beat UFC 200. So August 20th in Vegas. Now, last betting line I saw, I know you're a betting man, at the Monte Carlo about 10 days ago, McGregor minus 145, Nate Diaz plus 115. Seems like a lot of wise guy types like Nate Diaz, but at least right now, you can get him at plus money.
Yeah, and it's a betting line that kind of surprises me a little bit. I think we saw the size difference and the fact that now, with all this talk about Conor's preparations and now he's going to take it seriously and he's going to be ready for the big, long, lanky southpaw, Nate gets the benefit of all those preparations as well. He's not coming into this fight on short notice. And one thing, if you did see that photo of he and I standing next to each other by that mural, I mean, I'm not a small guy. I'm 5'11". I weigh, about 175, 177 pounds. Nate Diaz was towering over me. I mean, he made me look like a small man in that photo.
Yeah.
And when you compare that with Conor, I mean, I do think that the size is a big deal here. I think that that's something that Conor really has to overcome in this rematch. So to see him as a favorite and somewhat of a significant favorite when you're talking about minus 140, it is a little surprising to me.
Brett, is it crazy to say that maybe the long camp could hurt Nate Diaz, a guy who trains like an absolute animal, a guy who trains a lot? Could you say that maybe it could build up and lead to kind of maybe him not being as sharp? Because, I mean, this guy's doing triathlons. He trains all day long. Having the body fresh, we saw it with Michael Bisping. The fighters are kind of figuring out that maybe they don't need to train as hard or as much. Do you think it could affect Nate Diaz in a negative way?
I mean, there's always that possibility. You know that as a fighter better than I do, Kenny. Mm-hmm. But I think Nate has settled into such a good spot in terms of his training. He would be doing this anyway if he didn't have a fight.
Right.
He really loves to run and do those triathlons. I mean, he told me that if I don't have a fight schedule, because I asked him, when guys get to be bigger stars, sometimes they taper down a little bit. They only fight twice a year. Is that something that you would want to do now that you're making good money? Would you want to key in on maybe 2 big fights a year and that's it? And he's like, no. He's like, when I don't have a fight schedule, I'm dying. I mean, I'm eating whatever and I'm not really working out, and it gets to a point where like my mind needs something to drive it. I need to be motivated at all times to be doing something. That's when I'm at the happiest. And so, I think for him, it does work out well that he likes to work out, man. And when he's working out, he's a happy guy. And this camp in particular is nice because he can eat. He doesn't have to cut down to 155. He's fighting at 170. So I think he's in a really good place, and I don't see any negatives in terms of how long the camp is.
Brett, is Nate feeling any pressure, the fact that here he is? I know he wanted to fight him at 155 pounds. He felt that, fighting Conor at 170 pounds, that Conor already kind of has a built-in excuse if he does lose. Is Nate feeling any of that pressure at all?
I think Nate's a guy who feels a little bit of pressure with every fight, and just the sense of it's a fight to him. That's what I love about the Diaz brothers is that they're so real when it comes to describing like the risks that are going on with it. You know, you talk to him about a fight, like, are you excited? Are you nervous? Are you anticipating it because it's such a big fight? He's like, man, I'm just trying to keep my head level so I don't get killed out there. You know, I mean, that's like the most real answer I've ever gotten in terms of, you know, preparing for a fight. That I'm just trying. It's kill or be killed. That's what Nate always says.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an awesome approach. You know, he's not trying. You know, when I was out there, really, he doesn't like to talk about the fight. You know, the best conversations we had were just about Stockton and him growing up and his brother and everything else like that. When I started talking to him about Conor, you know, he really didn't have much to say, and you could just tell that that's just a topic he doesn't like to talk about. He doesn't like to sit around and talk about, you know, a cage fight that he's going to go into, and where there's a possibility where you can get seriously injured. I mean, that's how he looks at fights, which is crazy because then he looks so comfortable when he's in fights. You know, he's dropping his hands and he's yelling at him and he's Stockton slapping him all over the place, and you think he's having a great time. So that's kind of like the weird dynamic that makes Nate so fascinating. But is he feeling pressure? Yeah, I think he always does. I think he always has that realistic thing where, you know, I could get hurt in this fight. I need to make sure I'm at my best. And now he's in a good spot to do it. You know, years before when he was unhappy with his contract, he didn't really want to be there. He took some beatings. You know, now I'm thinking about what he told me. It was a great quote. He's like, think about, you know, I was doing this for a long time, and it was something that, you know, I kind of felt like I had to do just to pay my bills. Now I want to do it. Like, the money thing is good. Now I'm really motivated, and I want to do it. So imagine how much better I'm going to be under those circumstances, and I thought that was interesting.
Brett, is there one thing that, like, you know, because when I talk to Nate, he seems to be a very different guy in person than he is on the mic promoting his fights and things like that. What's that one thing that kind of surprised you, Nate, or that one thing that people may not know about Nate?
How nice he is.
Yeah.
Like my producer for the because we did some video shots obviously in Stockton, and so we had a producer out there from Bristol, and I asked the producer before we met up with Nate, like, do you follow the sport much? And he's like, yeah, I follow the big fights, so I'm aware of who Nate is. And we met Nate on Saturday at a coffee shop and ended up talking to him for like 2 or 3 hours. And when we got back in the car, my producer was like, man, that was not what I was expecting at all. I thought this guy was going to have a real, you know, rough edge to him. He was going to put up walls between us. He wasn't going to talk much. He's like, that was amazing. I mean, this guy's like one of the friendliest people I've ever met. And that's Nate. You know, he really is a very friendly guy. He just most of the time when we see him is on fight week. You know, and he's really turned that switch, and he's got that killer instinct now, where you know, he puts off this persona of the middle fingers and like that rough edge that you get. But when you're away from a fight, he's actually a really cool, non-confrontational guy at this point in his life.
Yeah, dude, marijuana. Potheads are nice guys. You know? Pretty simple. ESPN's Brett Okamoto with us here on the Kenny Florian podcast. Great insights, by the way, into Nate Diaz. And I'm going to keep it on Nate just a little bit longer if I could. So rematchers traditionally, I believe the numbers back this up, aren't great for the guy who won the first fight. Certainly money is a big part of the equation here for Nate, but yes, I would imagine, to Kenny's point, more pressure on him than a rematch here than even, say, a UFC lightweight championship fight. Might not even be as big as the Conor fight, but, you know, if Nate Diaz fought Eddie Alvarez next weekend, I'm not convinced that Nate wouldn't be favored to win the UFC lightweight championship. Any talk about that UFC lightweight title when you were with Nate recently?
Yeah, well, he's got that built-in little bit of history with Eddie. You know, I was back in, I forget exactly the card. Was it UFC 188? Was in Mexico. And Gilbert Melendez fought Eddie Alvarez. That was a fight that everybody had waited for a long time, because you had the Strikeforce champion against the Bellator champion, you know, Eddie and Gil. And, you know, even when Nate is not fighting, when his teammate is fighting, he kind of goes into, you know, that killer instinct mode. And he and Eddie, you know, exchanged some looks, and, you know, there was some talk between them, and Nate was like, you know, I don't need to be talking to you. You're fighting my boy, and et cetera, et cetera. You know how those things go during fight week. Yeah. So there is that history there. And, you know, Eddie's already calling for that fight because, of course, why wouldn't he? I mean, Nate has turned into, not even turned into, he always has been, but he's one of the biggest names in that lightweight division. So I think, yeah, there is a real shot at that fight, win or lose, for Nate Diaz. You know, maybe he might, if he lost to Conor, he'd have to get one more win at lightweight so he'd go into a title fight coming off of a win. But yeah, I mean, when you have the champion of that weight class calling you out, that shows how big of a star you are. And I think we will see that fight eventually.
I remember when we had Eddie Alvarez on our show here, I believe it was after the Anthony Pettis win, and he didn't want to hear the Nate Diaz noise then. He might have to hear it now, but it is interesting at 155, because if Conor McGregor wins that fight, I've thought for a while that his next fight would be for the lightweight championship and not the featherweight championship, because I think that is just a very difficult cut. But yeah, I mean, potentially the winner of McGregor Diaz, either one of those guys